We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the pure intention of seeking knowledge, to implement that in our lives. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us beneficial knowledge, give us knowledge that we benefit from it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our coming and our sitting, in whatever we say and whatever we hear, that we benefit from it. I wanted to start this book as we started in Ramadan, during i'tikaf for the last 10 days of Ramadan, with some of the brothers who were here for Asr Salah, and we would go for 45 minutes, an hour or so, and go through the book. And a lot of the brothers who, and there were a few sisters, I guess, now and then attended, and they really liked the concept of what Imam Ghazali has mentioned in the book and the content. So, and I really wanted to continue it after Ramadan, but many things come in our ways, and then Hajj, and then after that. So I would like to start again, inshallah. This book, it may take a few months, it may take a year or even more, but the goal is, inshallah, that whatever we read, we'll try to put that into practice and think of a practical way. So let's first talk a little bit about the author, and then after that we will talk a little bit about the book. So the book Bidayatul Hidayah, the beginning of guidance, is written by Imam al-Ghazali. His full name is Abu Hamid. That was his kunya, his nickname, and his name was Muhammad, the son of Muhammad, the son of Muhammad al-Ghazali al-Tusi al-Shafi'i. So that each word indicates to something significant about him. There was a famous story that a pious person saw the Prophet ﷺ, saw Imam al-Ghazali, and beside the Prophet ﷺ, Musa alayhi salam was sitting there. And it's good to start with a good, nice story. It's a little humorous. And Musa alayhi salam said to the Prophet ﷺ that we heard that you said about the prophets of the children of Israel, the ulama Bani Israel, that they were prophets, and within my own nation there are scholars who became almost equivalent to those prophets in their knowledge. Nobody can be equivalent to a prophet. You cannot meet the level of any prophet, no matter how high you are in your spiritual level or any level. Prophets are always going to be on the top. But in terms of knowledge, in terms of spreading that knowledge to others, because there's a hadith, well, you know, the scholars have actually categorized it as a weak hadith, but the meaning is sound, the meaning is sahih. That ulama'u ummati ka anbiya'i bani Israel, that my nation's scholars are equivalent to the prophets of Banu Israel. So how did you say that? You know, do you have any proof? So the Prophet ﷺ said that this guy sitting here, he's my proof. He's one of my followers, one of my ummah, my nation, and he is a proof. And Musa alayhi salam looks at him and he says, what's your name? He says, Muhammad bin Muhammad bin Muhammad Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And Musa alayhi salam says to him, I asked your name only and you gave me a whole lineage. Why is that? He said, he looked at the Prophet ﷺ and he was saying, should I answer Musa, peace be upon him, who was Kalimullah, he spoke to God. He's of that stature, and should I even answer this question? He was kind of like, this is the adab, the respect to someone who's great as a prophet. And the Prophet ﷺ said, answer. He said, you when Allah asks you about what is in your hand, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى, what is in your hand, O Moses? And you replied, هِيَ عَصَايَ أَتَوَكَّأُ عَلَيْهَا وَأَهُشُّ بِهَا عَلَى غَنَمِي وَلِيَ فِيهَا مَآرِبُ أُخْرَى. You also answered with 4 things instead of 1. Why was that? Musa alayhi salam said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was very true. What you said is true. So he answered him with his own actions, alayhi salatu wassalam, and all the prophets, peace and blessing be upon all of them. So Imam Ghazali, he was a very interesting person from the 5th century of Hijrah, approximately the 11th century, scholar who was born in 450 of Hijrah and died at the age of only 55, which is 505 of Hijrah. And he was from a place called Tus, and that's what it's called, Tusi. And he was a student of 2 great scholars. One was a great jurist and a great philosopher and all the other sciences that you could think of, Imam al-Juwayni. He was a very great jurisprudent as well. And he had also a spiritual teacher that he used to go in the evening to seek the spiritual aspect of his knowledge. So in the morning he will be seeking all the different sciences, and in the evening he will go and meet, his name was Abu Ali al-Fardini, and he will seek knowledge. Before even reaching the age of 30, he became this great iconic person, scholar of all the different sciences, and he was a professor in the Nidamiyya, which is the Harvard of our area in the Northeast, or I guess all over. So he was at and he had hundreds of students, and one time he was sitting there in his class, and it was just like, a breakdown. He felt that, what am I doing with all this knowledge and all these debates? And he would debate anyone. Nobody could stand in front of him. He was such a brilliant person in his knowledge. And he just walked out of his class, and he disappeared for 10 years and came back. And he came back as a very mystic person, as a Sufi person, as a spiritual person, a spiritual guide, instead of just teaching the sciences. And then during that time, he wrote a encyclopedia of all the different sciences, which is called Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the Islamic sciences. That book has 40 chapters, 40 books within those. It's printed in different volumes, 4, some have 5. Within those, it has 40 books on different aspects of our deen. So he revived the deen, and he had a very strong knowledge of the Greek philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, all those great philosophers. And what he did is that he mastered all those different sciences, and he used that to prove some of the rational aspects of our our ibadah, the acts or the beliefs that we have, in a very rational way. And also sometimes he will kind of say that their argument is very weak and it doesn't make sense because it kind of contradicts their own principles. So he brings a very rational things to some of our practices, and that's why he had a great acceptance. But it was a very common thing at that time to have all these different debates, but from a spiritual aspect, there was not much of learning and teaching at his time. So he realized that, and he brought a very different point of view of all of our things that we do and what we believe. And that's why he wrote that book, Ihya Ulumuddin. It's a book that it's very hard to pass by it for any scholar who actually wants to learn the different sciences of our deen. So it's a very interesting book. It will take centuries for us to actually wrap our head around it. And actually there's hardly any scholar that would say that I've comprehended everything that he said in that book. Anyway, that's a very comprehensive book for even to just to go over to read it by yourself. But he wrote approximately, as far as much we know, 200 books that is attributed towards him. Famous ones. So he wrote also Tahafutul Falasifa, the incoherent of the philosophers. So that was one of his great works. He wrote on jurisprudence, he wrote on different things, on theology and other things as well. But Bidayat al-Hidayah is actually the summary of the Ihya al-Ulumuddin. It's a summary. And how did he write that? He wrote this book because one of his students was seeking knowledge, and he wanted to know, how do I actually know, what, the knowledge that I'm seeking, what I'm getting out of it in a short term or in a long term, in this world and as well as in the hereafter, and what are my intentions should be when I'm seeking knowledge, and what are the aspects of it, what are the inner dimensions, the outer dimensions. He asked that question, and he was a lucky man that he got a response in an entire book, Bidayat al-Hidayah. So that was the reason why he wrote this book. And you will see that he will kind of question the same question that he received, that you want to seek knowledge and you want some guidance on it. What is your intention? What promoted you to do so? What promoted you? What made you actually go out and seek knowledge? What was your intention behind all of that? See, you will see that in the preface. He will talk about that. And then he puts his book into three categories. One is the ta'at, the things that we do, all the way from our 5 daily prayers, our zakah, our hajj, all those things that we do on a regular basis. So things that we do, ta'at, obedience. And the second part of the book will talk about the things that you don't do, so the do's and the don'ts. The don'ts will be in the second part of the book, ijtinab al-ma'asi, to stay away from the disobedience. So obedience and disobedience. And he puts a lot of emphasis on, in a lot of his works, like Minhaj al-Abidin, one of his books, he talks about that it is more important to protect yourself from disobedience than putting a lot of emphasis and time and energy into obedience. So if someone does not sin, but he does a very little good actions, that's better than doing a lot of good actions but also sinning at the same time. So that's, and then the third part, it's about the adab. How do we deal with the creation? A very true person, when he is talking, like he is talking from his own experience, because he himself went through that. He was the most famous person in the academic sphere, and people always go to him, and he was the person, a go-to person. And he when he is very genuinely, he will even ask very tough questions, and that's why you will see in the first part he says that if it's for just to show off or to compete with your what do you call it, aqran, with your contemporary people, scholars, or you want to just bring people to yourself, how many likes, how many followers. He's talking about that how many years ago from now? 900 years ago. So this is something very interesting about Ghazali, that his works and his writings, you will find it very, very relevant to our time. Even the way how he talks about ulama as-su, the scholars who just, the scholars who are not good scholars. And he's as if he is just talking to us in this day and age, right at like today. Subhanallah. And to acquire the worldly things. And then he says, you are not going to build your deen, you're actually destructing your deen. And you're destructing your own self. And you're selling your hereafter for your dunya. And then what he says, if you are doing this transaction, he says فَالصَّفَقَتُكَ خَاسِرَةٌ وَتِجَارَتُكَ بَائِرَةٌ وَمُعَلِّمُكَ مُعِينٌ لَكَ عَلَى عِصْيَانِكَ وَشَرِيكٌ لَكَ فِي خُسْرَانِكَ وهو كبائع سيف من قاطع الطريق كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم من أعان على معصية ولو بشطر كلمة كان شريكا له فيها.
Your transaction is empty, your business profitless, and the person who teaches you in this case is nothing less than an accomplice in your transgression, a partner.
So how hard he comes on, like even if someone is teaching you, he's actually helping you in your destruction. Yes, and he's the example that he gives.
He can be compared to one who sells a sword to a highway robber.
Now, from a fiqhi perspective, it is permissible to sell a gun to someone, although you might know that person might harm someone with that. You know, just like lending your place or giving your home or your property on rent to someone who is going to make alcohol. You know, all these different scenarios. Is it permissible or not? So the fuqaha will say yes, it's permissible, because someone is going to use a gun for something. It could be right, it could be wrong. So he's saying that if you know for sure that someone is going to kill someone, then why would you give the gun in that person's hand? He's going to maybe kill you first. So he's saying that, so to give knowledge to that, so he comes out very hard, very harsh.
He said that was a hadith? He said kama qala.
Yes, so he gives a hadith. Can you read the hadith?
For as the Messenger of Allah said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, indeed whoever helps you with the sin by even half the work is a partner in it.
Two things to notice. The first one was the last part that we read is hadith. And two things to keep in mind. Number one, Imam Ghazali was not a muhaddith. He was a faqih. Jurisprudence was one of his expertise, and that's why he has a whole book on that, Al-Mustasfa. But in terms of jurisprudence, in terms of his fiqh, he followed the Shafi'i fiqh. And you will see in his works, especially in this book, he will talk about different things. For example, making wudu, praying, and so on and so forth. He will go according to the Shafi'i fiqh. So, if it's needed, inshallah, we'll indicate to maybe the difference of the madhahib. So that you have to keep in mind. So if he says something that is different than what you practice, then he's saying something according to what the madhab follows. And sometimes he will choose the marjuh qawl above the rajih qawl, the preferred view. He will leave that and choose the non-preferred view of the madhab. So that will be some of his cases as well. In terms of hadith, he was not a muhaddith, and that was one of his regrets that he had early on. And later on, he would always read the books of hadith, and he will ask his students to read for him. And actually, it is recorded that he died with the book of Bukhari on his chest. He was reading the Jami' al-Sahih of Imam Bukhari. That's how he died. And that's why one of his last works, which is Minhaj al-Abidin, you will find in that book he has, most of the hadith are authenticated, and some of them have extra words in it or something like that, or not very strong a hadith. So that's his weak point, and that's accepted, from all the scholars, mashallah. Nobody's perfect. He's not a prophet, right? So that's why he quotes his hadith, and according to most of the scholars, the hadith, it is not authenticated, it's not a sahih hadith with these words, but something similar to that in meaning, because a lot of times he will quote the meaning of the hadith. Basically, it will be in Arabic, so it would sound like as if that's exactly what the Prophet ﷺ said. But there's also a narration which they call it riwaya bil ma'na, that you don't quote the exact words of the Prophet ﷺ, instead you use the meaning of what the hadith had. So riwaya bil ma'na. So there's also scholars have mentioned the conditions for that. It's not for any person to just say this is the meaning of the hadith. It could be right, it could be wrong. But anyway, the hadith Ibn Majah is من أعان على قتل مؤمن بشطر كلمة لقي الله عز وجل مكتوب بين عينيه آيس من رحمة الله. So that's the hadith. But he quoted the meaning of the hadith that whoever helps a person on a sin, even with one word, with one sentence, كان شريكا له, he is with that wrongdoer. He will gain the same sin as if he did it. Anyway, even that hadith, some of the scholars say that is weak, but it's a very general rule of the scholars of hadith that the hadith, even if it's da'if, it is accepted in the fada'il, mentioning the virtues of a certain thing or the sin of any bad deed. In that case, is accepted because there's no action to it. It's not something that is halal or haram. It's not making any. For making something halal and haram, you need a very strong proof for that. Anyway, so he says that if that's your intention, that's the result. So he gives a very rational, meaning to what he's trying to bring. So that's the first part. The second, he says, وَإِنْ كَانَتْ نِيَتُكَ وَقَصْدُكَ بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى مِنْ طَلَبِ الْعِلْمِ الْهِدَايَةِ دُونَ مُجَرَّدِ الرِّوَايَةِ فأبشر فإن الملائكة تبسط أجنحتها إذا مشيت وحيتان البحر تستغفر لك إذا سعيت.
But if in seeking knowledge your intention and aim between Allah Most High and yourself is to gain guidance and not simply the transmission of information, then glad tidings be to you. The angels will spread their wings for you as you walk, and the fish in the sea will ask forgiveness for you as you strive.
So that's the other part. If your intention is what? Between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you want to gain the knowledge of guidance. طَلَبُ عِلْمِ الْهِدَايَةِ, the knowledge of guidance. Just not to, and that's why, and as I mentioned, that he is talking from his own experience. He's very, as now there's a very common term that people use, to being very genuine. It is mentioned that he was traveling with all of his books and his notes and all of what he has accumulated for many years from his teachers, and highway robbers stopped him and tried to take all of his. He said, take everything, but please, not my notes, not my books, my knowledge. So the leader of those robbers, he came to him and he said, well, if that's all of your knowledge, then you're nothing. If you cannot produce anything without those notes and that books that you have, then it means that you have nothing with you. You're an empty man. At that point, he realized that, oh my goodness, what I have done. I've gathered all of that and I'm so worried about it because if I lose it, I'm nothing. Although he was still a great scholar. But that realization, so that's what is translating when he is talking to his student, that if it's not just the riwayah, you're writing and you're reading and you're listening, then glad tidings to you, because the angels, as the Prophet ﷺ says, that when a person seeks knowledge and he walks, the angels spread their wings under his feet or her feet, and the creatures in the holes and the small insects and the fish in the ocean make istighfar for him, for a seeker of knowledge, just for a seeker of knowledge. So whenever we go to the masjid, if we include that intention in our going to the masjid or going for any circle of knowledge, then you'll be included in that glad tiding. Inshallah, we'll continue next week on Wednesday. Inshallah, every Wednesday we'll continue on this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us knowledge that we can gain the knowledge of guidance. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه.